you know, like piercing eyes and piercing eyes and pierce, like how many eyes can be piercing and they pierce all the time. The next book is Saving April by Sarah Denzil, or Denzile, I don't know, Denzil, I think. They start questioning Alice, who's, learn their names. Learn their names. Didn't grab it before I did the video and I don't feel like getting up to get it, which I guess I won't be losing the weight. Hi everyone, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. Today's video is going to be my February reading rewind, and I read/listened to 10 books this month. I did Contemporary-a-thon, I did my 2019 reread, so all in, lots of books, good month, some disappointments, some complete surprises, lots to talk about of course, so let's just get into it. So I'm gonna start with my Contemporary-a-thon books, and I'm gonna go super quick because there's a whole other video about these, but I read/listened to 4 books. So I did First Comes Love by Emily Giffin, which is 2 books ago. So I think this came out like 2 or 3 years ago. And it's a story about 2 sisters. They are in their kind of like mid to late 30s. And it's chiefly about like sort of where they're at in their lives and their relationship with each other. What I love about this book is that it is not a rainbows and unicorns, sisters as besties kind of a story. It to me felt like a very authentic depiction of how sisters and, you know, how siblings are, whether it is jealousy or envy or animosity or tension or sort of misinterpretation of things or people's roles in the family and, you know, sort of their connection through their parents and their connection through their brother. I thought it was a very kind of raw, real story, and I cried. And spoiler alert, I cried during all 4 books. The second book I read was Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake. I got this from the library, which is why I'm not holding on to it. And this is very kind of heavy YA. And it is about a brother and sister, they're twins, and the brother is accused of raping his girlfriend, who is also the best friend of the sister. And we get this through the sister's perspective, and, you know, her looking at her brother and thinking like, could he possibly have done this? But I also completely believe my best friend because you believe the victim and I trust that she's not making this up. So sort of being torn between your friends and your family. There's a female-female relationship in this. There's diversity in this. It's a very heavy book. There's a lot of issues that are covered in it. There's triggers, of course, across the board. So I would say it was a well-done book. I mentioned this in my review. I also felt keenly aware that I was reading YA, and it's not a ding on the book, but I felt a little bit more old reading this one. Sometimes I read YA and I don't feel like I'm even cognizant of the fact that I'm reading a YA book, but in this one I did. It is a good book. While not an apples to apples kind of comparison, I did connect much better with Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I think the writing in that was beautiful. I think the exploration there of sexual assault and the aftermath and the families and the friends was so beautifully done. I also think Girl Made of Stars was done really well. It's just they're different books kind of in the same vein. So if you're looking between the two, I would start with Beartown. It's just my opinion, but I enjoyed this book. I'm glad I read it. There's a beautiful afterword by the author that basically just knocked me to my knees, but it's heavy. So just be aware that that one's very heavy. The next one I read, I actually mostly listened to, but it's Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. And this sounds like a mystery, but not a mystery. So literally the first page of the book, or the first line of the book, is Lydia is dead. And she's the middle child of the Lee family, who is a Chinese-American family living in Ohio back in the 70s. And this book is very much an exploration of family. It's an exploration of culture of the time. And we see sort of the present day, but it's not police procedural. It's not all about the investigation. We do eventually find out what happened to Lydia, so you're not like left with an open end, but it is about how her death affects the family. It goes, you know, backwards a little bit of time, sort of leading up to it, where people, you know, were trying to figure out what could have led to her being killed. And it goes back, way back in time, to when the parents first meet and the exploration of their relationship and their marriage. And just sort of the complexities of the time, the complexities of a family, of a marriage, of siblings, of, you know, wanting to please your parents, both the children and the Lees, and then the Lees and their parents. So there's a lot to it. I thought it was great. There's a lot for a little book. I really enjoyed it. I had heard some people say that this was not as good as Little Fires Everywhere, and I haven't read that yet. So if that book is better than this one, I'm really excited because I thought this was a good book. And lastly, I read Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. So happy I read it. So in love with Eleanor. I cried my eyes out multiple times. Like, this just like yanked at my heart and everything. And it was so good. And I was honest, it took me a good 100 pages to get into this book. And I was worried that I wasn't going to get into it, that I was going to miss the boat on something great because I was going to have to put this down. So if you're struggling to get in, stick with it. Because when I hit page 100, I was like off to the races. I couldn't get through this fast enough. I love this book. I would say, you know, be prepared for some heavy stuff, but also she's so like dryly, wickedly funny, and looking at the world through her eyes can be beautiful, and it can be gut-wrenching. But such a good book, and I'm so happy I read it. The next book I read was part of my 2019 reread project, and if you're not familiar with that, I did a whole video on how I wanted to revisit some favorites from years past. One of the books on that list was The Client by John Grisham, and I haven't read this book in ages, and I honestly haven't even read Grisham in ages, and I was obsessed with him and read so many of his books and just, you know, kind of fell off the track somewhere along the way. But I stumbled upon an author interview with him, I think it was like October, because I was prepping for NaNoWriMo, and it reminded me of why, like, I loved his books and why I love his stories and his characters and why I love like his story about how he became a writer, and instantly kind of wanted to revisit his books. And I picked this one because I remember crying when I read it the first time, and crying in a thriller doesn't, you know, normally happen for me, but I really felt connected to these characters, and I really loved what he did with this book. So it's the one I picked. I'm so happy I did. It's heavy, so I'm putting it down. I had forgotten so many details of this book, which was great because there was so much of it that felt like I was reading it for the first time. And it was a slower kind of buildup than I had remembered. And it's about this 11-year-old boy, Mark Swain. They live in Memphis, and him and his younger brother sort of witness this bizarre suicide. This lawyer from New Orleans rolls into town. They witness his suicide, but before the attorney kills himself, he confesses this deep, dark secret to Mark. And he is the attorney for this kind of mafia guy, and the mafia guy is suspected of killing the senator, and this is all book jacket stuff. You know, the lawyer tells Mark that like he did it, and this is where the body's buried, and the FBI hasn't been able to find it, and now Mark knows. And to kind of make things worse, his younger brother goes into shock because of what he's seen. He's hospitalized, single mom. They live in this trailer park. They live like barely paycheck to paycheck. I think of this, I mean, again, this book is probably from like the mid 90s. She makes like $6 an hour. Things are really rough. The police are pushing Mark. He's not telling the police everything that he knows, and they know it. Meanwhile, his face is splattered everywhere as having been at the suicide of this lawyer. So now you've got the FBI involved, and the mafia knows who he is. And everybody wants what he's got in his head. Everybody wants that nugget of information. So Mark winds up connecting with this lawyer, Reggie Love, and she's kind of this very small-time lawyer. She's like late 40s or early 50s. She's been a lawyer for 4 years. She kind of has her own baggage and her own past. And they connect, and they become, you know, confidants and partners in this crime, so to speak. And, you know, they are fighting to survive and running to survive, and they're hiding, and they're dodging the police, and they're dodging the FBI, and they're dodging the mafia, and you kind of get into typical Grisham type of stuff. And it's so good, and these characters are so good, and this relationship between Mark and Reggie is just like everything. And if there's any doubt, don't have doubt. I cried again, of course, but I completely loved this, and I loved the story, and I I'm wholly reminded why I love Grisham's writing. And I'm so happy I reread this, and I'm excited to read more of his. But if you haven't read this book, I mean, it's such a good one. They did make a movie of it, of course. It's Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones and a whole slew of other people. Mary Louise Parker's in it. She plays the mom. So I'm excited to watch the movie too. I'm enjoying kind of these trips down memory lane. But great book. Super happy I read it. If you haven't, definitely give it a go, because it's a great one. It's one of his best, I think. The first nonfiction book I read was Lose the Clutter, Lose the Weight by Peter Walsh. And I talk about this in great detail in my decluttering video. And this is, I mostly did the audiobook of this. I have the physical book someplace. And this is about how to declutter and, you know, kind of how to get stuff out of your house and how to get more organized. And there's a big overarching scientific piece to this, which I did find interesting, but not necessarily necessary if you're just kind of looking to clean house. So Peter Walsh has other books. I enjoy kind of his no-nonsense, judgment-free style. So if you're looking for just sort of some decluttering stuff, he has other books out there if you're not interested in the scientific piece. But I found it to be interesting. There were definitely some good takeaways, but check out my decluttering video to hear me kind of dive deeper on that and 2 other decluttering books that I read. The other nonfiction book I read is Fearless and Fabulous by Cara Alwell-Leba. And I actually got this as a free ebook, so who doesn't love free? But I follow her on her Instagram, which is The Champagne Diet, and her blog, which is Cara Alwell. Tongue twister, Cara Alwell. I'll include that down below. But she is a life coach. She's written maybe like 7 or 8 books. I read her book, The Champagne Diet. She's like a motivational speaker. She's like woman power. She's an entrepreneur. She's an influencer. She's a very interesting woman. I find her Instagram to be amazing. I find it to be very inspiring. And this is one of those books. It's kind of like 10 tips to be fearless and fabulous. And I would say, you know, there was nothing really in here I hadn't heard before, but I enjoy her writing style. I enjoy her literal voice. She does podcasts also. And it was kind of like a nice little like kick reminder of like, you can do this, you've got this. You know, if you need a little bit of inspiration in your life, if you need a little bit of like pep in your step kind of a thing, it was fun. So I enjoy her across the board. And I was very happy to get a free ebook of this one. The next 2 books I read were inspired by my Shopping My Shelf video. And I had picked, I don't know, maybe like 10 books that were on my shelf that I bought sometime in the past year or 4 that I haven't read. So the first one I picked up this month is Pretty Nasty Lovely by Rosalind Noonan. And I got this at Thriller Fest last year. And this is about bad things that happen at sororities, which I was super excited about. And it's like sisterhood has a price. And I admitted this already. I was in a sorority. I loved it. I had a great time. I'm still very good friends with some of the girls from my days. But fortunately, none of us were like the girls in this book, and nobody died when I was there. So this is a book where one of the sisters commits suicide, and it's kind of this poor college, which is apparently made up of like a whole bunch of bridges, and people periodically jump off them during the year. And it's very public, and everyone knows about it, and the college is getting a really bad reputation about it. So this focuses on one particular sister who has committed suicide and kind of the aftermath of it, and, you know, what was going on with her and what possibly could have driven her to this. And the school is worried about it, and not just the image that it's giving the school, but also, you know, what's going on with these kids. So sadly, I was kind of disappointed in this book. I wanted it to be more. I wanted it to dig deeper. I thought there were a lot of opportunities for the story to take a better turn or to really like amp it up a bit. And there were a couple things that like didn't quite make sense and weren't really like cleared up at the end. And a little bit of it felt a little too like cliche kind of stereotypes about sororities, but the author herself was in one. So, I mean, everyone's experience is different. Murder and all that aside, the kind of the experience in this book was not mine, whether it was the stereotypical version of what I thought of sororities or what I saw at my school or what I know some other friends of mine had like gone through at their schools. So I was a little bit disappointed in that because I wanted it to be something different, which is less about the book not being good and more about kind of what I was looking for from the book. And also, you don't like pledge in September and become a sister in the end of October. Like, no. You go at least a semester, if not a year, before you get in. So the timeline of the most fundamental part of pledging a sorority made no sense to me. But anyway, I would say no. I mean, if you're looking for kind of like an easy throwaway book or you have a little sorority curiosity, but all in, sad to say, I was disappointed in this one. The second book from my shelf shopping is Best Friends Forever by Margot Hunt. And this is a book about two women, Kat and Alice, who are best friends, but they're unlikely best friends. So Kat is kind of this wealthy socialite, owns an art gallery. They're down in Palm Beach, and her husband is very wealthy. She comes from a very wealthy family, and Alice is married. She has two kids. They've got money problems. She's kind of got some like marriage problems. They're struggling really financially. But these women just become the best of friends and life is good until Kat's husband dies and fell off his balcony or was pushed off his balcony or something off his balcony. But Kat was in London when it happens, but the police have tons of questions. And of course, they're going to question her best friend, Alice, who knew them, knew the husband, and knew what was going on. But what happens is, you know, the police want to question Alice and she's calling Kat up to see what's going on, and Kat has completely ghosted her. So what's going on with these women? What happened to the husband? This is told, you know, in varying time frames. So we go sort of from how the ladies met and what's going on now. And I really, really, really wanted to like this book, and I really, really, really thought it had a lot of potential. And there were parts that I liked, but I just wanted more. And kind of like the other book, I feel like there was some missed opportunity. And while this is in no way similar, other than the fact that you have two women who are unlikely friends, that element reminded me of The Last Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. And that was a book that I really enjoyed. And where I think this book sort of like had a misstep, or maybe where I couldn't connect with it, The Last Mrs. Parrish, you kind of meet the women when they first meet, sort of this unlikely friendship, but you get to understand how they become friends and why, and you understand that dynamic between the two women. And again, completely different books. Nothing that happens in Mrs. Parrish happens in this one. But in this book, you sort of go from like, they meet at JFK, they go out for lunch a couple times, they're the best of friends, and then Kat's ghosting her. I didn't understand, like I didn't buy their friendship. So it was hard for me to be invested in like the best friends forever, where I was kind of like, why are you even friends? And I didn't feel like the character of Kat, I keep checking her name to make sure that's right, was as well developed. Like I didn't feel like I got to know her as well. So I kind of had a hard time buying into the whole story because I wasn't really connected with the character. And I feel like a complete jerk saying this because who am I? But I feel like I could tell it was her first thriller because I felt like a lot of things were repeated in it, sort of certain turns of phrases, like if we like keep hearing about Kat's piercing eyes over and over again, over and over, over and over. And there was also this huge inconsistency about Alice's parents and like who they were and what they did, and like sort of like that her parents are together, but then later they're divorced, like to the point that I went back and reread part of it to make sure I didn't misunderstand something. So I just didn't feel like it was the best written or edited book. And again, I kind of feel like a jerk. So, you know, there's a thriller aspect to it. You got some twists in it. You've got, you know, socialite-y, drinking, partying, kind of elements to it. You've got this mysterious murder. So there is some tension points. There are some good elements to it. I didn't think it was like a total bad book. I just wished it had been more. And I just wish I got to know the women more, because I just, it's not a very long book, so there was opportunity to do more with it, I thought. But I just wish I had gotten to know the women more, so I would have been more invested in their stories. The next book I read is Far From You by Tess Sharp. And this is a book that was recommended by Lala, Books and Lala. And I feel like she said this was like underrated or not talked about enough, and I would completely agree. And this book came out a couple years ago. It's a YA book, it's a thriller, and I did not feel at all like I was reading YA when I was reading this, which I loved. And this is a book about a girl named Sophie, and Sophie has sort of kicked this drug problem she had. She was in a terrible car accident a few years ago, really got addicted to the pain pills, but has cleaned herself up, come home. She's like 16, I think they're like 16, 17, and kind of reunites with her best friend Mina, and she's home for a couple of weeks, and the girls are gonna head to a party, but Mina's like, we just like need to make one stop first. And Mina winds up getting murdered. And everyone thinks that what happened that night was a drug deal that Sophie was on, and it's Sophie's fault that Mina was killed, and that Sophie's back on drugs. She gets shipped back off to rehab, and then she comes home again. And she comes home to a much different life and a much different world, and she comes home to a life without her best friend. And she knows that what happened that night is not what everybody else thinks happened that night. And Sophie is committed to finding out what happened to Mina, who killed her, and why. So this becomes that journey. But it is told in differing timelines, which I love. So you kind of get sort of the original after the car crash when she's first becoming addicted to the pills. You get glimpses of her and Mina's friendship throughout and other people in their network, friends, family, all of these things. And it's just... it was such a good book, and it was such a good story, and I was compulsively reading it, and I needed to see what was going to happen next. I thought it was smart. I thought there were good twists to it. I really enjoyed the characters. I believed in their relationships. You have a female-female relationship in this. I completely was in it with them. I was in it with Sophie. I knew why she did what she did, why she had to do what she had to do. But this was a pleasant surprise to me in the sense that I had never heard of this author before. Completely Lala mentioned it. I went onto my iPad. I was able to find it immediately via Overdrive, and I just devoured it. Or maybe Hoopla. Either way. So pleasantly surprised by this book, and I thought it was so well done. So if you're looking for a good mystery, I would say check it out. Definitely give it a go. I haven't read anything else by Tess Sharp. I need to look into other things that she wrote, but this was definitely a surprising, huge win for me. The next book is Saving April by Sarah Denzel, and I did a much deeper dive into this book as well, but this is a book that was brought to my attention as part of the A.J. Finn, Dan Mallory, New Yorker kind of extravaganza expose about him. And one of the many elements that came out of that story was that the plot of The Woman in the Window was partially pulled from Saving April. And this book came out in March of 2016. The Woman in the Window came out in January of 2018. And there's a lot of talk about, where a lot of his story and his plot points came from. So there were a lot of comparisons, and I just wanted to find out for myself, and I was curious, and I wanted to see what everybody was talking about. And, the writer in me is kind of equally fascinated, equally horrified by all of this, and I just wanted to know for myself. So I read it, and at the risk of spoiling stuff for you guys, there's a lot in Saving April that is in The Woman in the Window, and not just classic kind of tropes in books of the rear window aspect, which we can all agree has been done so many times over in books and in movies and in TV shows. So that's not a unique idea. I get it. I don't want to go into too many spoilers here other than to say if you read The Woman in the Window, this book will feel very familiar to you. I feel like I can't give a fair rating or review of the book because I did kind of know what was happening next. I mean, there are differences in the book. It's not a complete copycat of it, although P.S. apparently he also stole from that movie Copycat with Sigourney Weaver and Holly Hunter from years ago. So I don't know how I would feel about Saving April if I had read it first and read it independently. You know, I think there are some good elements to this. I think there were opportunities to make it better. I think, you know, there were things that I enjoyed about it. So I would say, you know, I am happy to support her as a writer. At the time I'm filming this, you can get the book for 99 cents on Amazon Kindle. I'm happy to get that, like, give that money to her, and put my money, you know, into this book as well. The book was successful in its own right when it came out, and it became a bestseller on Amazon Kindle. So, you know, more props to her for that. And, you know, she had even said that, you know, after she read The Woman in the Window, she did see similarities, but didn't think she had enough to do anything about it. And it's sort of the sad part of, you know, copyright and stories and plagiarism and how to prove it and what you need to prove it. And it's very difficult to prove. So a lot of people do take inspiration legitimately from things, but unless you're stealing kind of line by line, it's very hard to prove that somebody took your story to create another one. But I would say if you have a curiosity about it, I would read it. Again, I'm happy to support her as a writer. I'm glad I read the book. I'm glad I read it for myself so I can form my own opinions about things. But I was surprised at sort of the level of detail and elements that were the same in both books and weren't just Rear Window, unreliable narrator kind of tropes that made it similar. So yeah, watch my other video. Let me know what you think about that. But yeah, I mean, I would read it. And if you haven't read Woman in the Window, by far, start here. You know, kind of start where it all started. So that was February. So like shortest month, longest video, I'm sure. Someday I'll get better about saying things with fewer words, but that's what I read. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or let me know some of the best books you read this month, or if you had any disappointments, or, you know, all of that good stuff. But thank you, of course, for hanging out this entire time, especially if you're still here at this stage of the game. And I'll be back soon, because I always have more to say. So I'll see you in the next video, and I hope you guys have a great day. So thank you, everybody. Bye.